The first warning came without sirens. It arrived as a faint pulse buried beneath the endless static that drifted through the silent reaches between the stars. By the time anyone aboard the research outpost Helios station noticed it, another transmission had already disappeared into the darkness. The signal repeated every 97 seconds, weaker each time, as though the ship sending it had exhausted every reserve of energy simply to whisper that it still existed. Captain Kalen had once commanded one of the finest exploration cruisers in the Arcturian Coalition. His silver uniform had carried medals earned from peaceful expeditions, scientific discoveries, and rescue missions that made him proud to serve a civilization that claimed compassion as its greatest achievement. Those medals were gone now. They had been traded months earlier to keep a broken oxygen recycler operating for another week. The polished command deck, where diplomats once drank tea overlooking the stars, had become a freezing shelter filled with frightened civilians wrapped in thermal blankets that smelled of recycled chemicals and old fear. Every corridor aboard the cruiser carried the same sound: coughing, not the loud, dramatic cough of illness, but the dry, exhausted cough of lungs breathing recycled air that had been cleaned too many times. Kalen stood over the navigation console while his first officer, Lyra, studied another incoming report. "We've lost another oxygen garden." Kalen closed his eyes. "How many remain?" "1. Food." She hesitated before answering. "If we stop feeding the engineering crews, perhaps 6 days, and if we don't, 3. Silence settled between them. No officer wanted to say what everyone already understood. The cruiser had become a floating grave, waiting for permission to die. Outside the damaged observation window drifted the wreckage of the human mining outpost that had unknowingly become the center of a political disaster. Months earlier, the Dominion of Varkesh had attacked the isolated human installation without warning, believing Earth too distant and too divided to respond. The outpost had fought until every defense battery melted into slag. Its distress beacon had fallen silent. The Dominion celebrated. The galaxy barely noticed. But Kalen's vessel had stumbled into the aftermath while transporting refugees. They witnessed the attack, attempted to record evidence, and immediately became targets themselves. The Dominion could not allow witnesses. Their engines had been shattered, their communications arrays crippled, their escort destroyed. Now they floated in empty space where no trade lanes passed, and where every government that received their distress calls quietly calculated the same equation. Helping them meant provoking the Dominion. Ignoring them cost nothing. One by one, the great civilizations stopped answering. The Republic sent condolences. The Syndicate requested patience. The Celestial Assembly promised diplomatic review. None sent ships. None risked lives. Kalen never forgot the final message from the Coalition High Council. "We regret that present strategic circumstances prevent direct intervention." Strategic circumstances. He repeated those words every night because hatred required something solid to hold on to. Nearby, 12-year-old refugee Neris watched him from the hallway, clutching a stuffed creature stitched together from scraps of old uniforms. Her father had died repairing the reactor 2 weeks earlier after refusing to abandon his station. She had stopped crying after the funeral. Children always frightened Kalen the most. Adults eventually surrendered to despair. Children simply became quiet. Lyra noticed the girl. "Captain." "I know." Kalen walked toward her and knelt despite the stiffness in his aging knees. "Have you eaten today?" She nodded. It was a lie. He smiled anyway. "My mother used to tell me something." "What?" "Stars disappear every morning. That doesn't mean they've died." She looked toward the frozen window. "I can't see any stars." Kalen swallowed before answering. "They're still there." Hours later, another crew member collapsed from exhaustion while carrying replacement filters through engineering. No one rushed anymore. Everyone conserved energy. Even emergencies happened slowly. Chief Engineer Tovan wiped grease from cracked hands and leaned against a humming coolant pipe. "The reactor can give us another 30 hours. Only 30, if we're lucky. What if we shut down gravity? We lose medical support. What about weapons? Weapons have no power left." Kalen nodded. He wasn't asking because he expected miracles. He asked because commanders were supposed to keep asking. Far beyond the dying cruiser, inside a forgotten human listening station built into an asteroid hidden along the edge of explored space, Sergeant Daniel Hayes rubbed tired eyes while monitoring communications traffic. The station possessed no glamorous technology. Thick steel walls sweated condensation. Coffee stained nearly every console. Maintenance crews complained constantly about outdated equipment held together by bolts older than most of the personnel serving there. It was exactly the kind of place humanity trusted. Machines failed. People listened. Daniel almost dismissed the weak transmission as cosmic interference until one detail caught his attention. The distress signal never stopped. Most automated beacons eventually repeated predictable loops. This one changed. Tiny pauses. Breathing patterns. Human operators recognized instinctively what algorithms overlooked. Someone was still alive. He increased the signal gain. The recording filled the room. Any vessel, hearing, civilians aboard, life support failing. The alien language was fragmented, but Earth's translation software slowly pieced together enough meaning. Daniel's expression hardened. They're dying. His supervisor looked over. Military? Civilians. Who are they? No idea. Who attacked them? Daniel highlighted another section. The computer translated carefully. After observing destruction, human outpost. The room became completely silent. Within 20 minutes, encrypted reports reached Earth. Within an hour, military satellites confirmed ancient records of the destroyed frontier outpost. Within 3 hours, emergency meetings began across every continent. The United Earth Defense Council assembled beneath reinforced ceilings scarred by decades of previous wars. No luxurious marble decorated the chamber. Human governments had learned long ago that expensive buildings impressed no enemy and protected no citizen. Admiral Marcus Hale entered carrying a worn folder instead of a digital tablet. Old habits. Paper couldn't be hacked. Around him, presidents, ministers, scientists, and military chiefs argued before the meeting officially began. The Dominion possesses nearly 4,000 combat vessels. We've never fought them. This may trigger a sector-wide war. Our economy cannot absorb another major conflict. What if it's a trap? Marcus listened quietly. Then he placed a photograph onto the center table. The room gradually fell silent. It showed Helios Outpost before its destruction. 137 human workers smiled beside mining equipment coated in dust. Families, mechanics, doctors, teachers, children. They died because nobody came, Marcus said. No one interrupted him. He continued in the calm voice that made younger officers nervous. Now another ship is dying because they tried to tell the truth about what happened here. A minister folded his hands. If we intervene, millions may die, Marcus nodded. They might, and if the Dominion retaliates, they probably will. Another leader leaned forward. You're recommending war. Marcus shook his head. No. He looked around the chamber. I'm recommending rescue. Silence returned. Dr. Elena Vargas finally spoke. If those medical reports are accurate, they have less than 48 hours. Marcus answered immediately. Then we've already wasted too much time talking. No speech followed. No patriotic applause. One by one, hands rose across the table. Authorization approved. Earth would launch. Across orbital shipyards surrounding the planet, klaxons echoed through enormous construction docks. Welding torches flashed like artificial lightning as technicians abandoned routine maintenance and prepared emergency deployment procedures. The fleet chosen for the mission wasn't elegant. Human ships never were. They resembled armored factories wrapped around engines powerful enough to drag mountains through space. Every surface carried visible repairs. Every hull displayed scars. Every captain knew exactly where previous battles had nearly broken them. Thousands of workers sprinted across launch platforms carrying ammunition crates, medical supplies, portable hospitals, atmospheric processors, water purification systems, and enough emergency food to feed an entire city. No one asked whether the aliens deserved saving. The question had already been answered. Nurse Amelia Brooks tightened medical gloves while boarding the hospital carrier, Mercy's Promise. Another medic smiled nervously. Think they'll even trust us? Amelia secured her helmet. They don't have to. What do you mean? We're not flying all this way to earn trust. She looked toward the enormous rescue convoy outside the docking bay. We're going because they're alive. Nearby, engineers manually loaded replacement reactor cores using cranes because his automation remained too slow for emergency deployment. Marines inspected magnetic rifles but stacked them behind relief cargo instead of in front. Doctors boarded before soldiers. Water tanks occupied more cargo space than missiles. Human priorities had been decided long before launch. Admiral Marcus Hale walked through the flagship Resolute without speaking much. Crew members straightened as he passed. Some looked frightened. Others determined. None appeared eager for glory. Bridge Officer Sophia Chen approached quietly. Fleet assembled. Medical ships, ready escort groups, standing by. Evacuation capacity, 70,000. Marcus nodded once. No one gets left behind. Outside, hundreds of engines awakened almost together. The darkness surrounding Earth began glowing blue. Families gathered on observation platforms across orbital habitats, watching impossible amounts of steel drift away from their home. There were no celebrations, only quiet understanding. Every departing ship carried sons, daughters, parents, friends. The rescue fleet accelerated toward the edge of the solar system in disciplined silence. Far away, Captain Kalen recorded what he believed would become his final log. Our oxygen reserves are nearly depleted. Engineering cannot sustain reactor output beyond another rotation. Several children have stopped waking for meal distribution. I have informed the crew there will be no further rescue attempts. To whoever eventually discovers this vessel, know that we remain together until the end. He reached toward the console to terminate the recording. Then the sensor officer suddenly froze. His trembling hands hovered above fading displays. Captain, Kalen looked up. What is it? I have multiple slip-space distortions. Dominion? I don't know. How many? The officer stared in disbelief. His voice barely emerged. Hundreds. Every exhausted soul aboard the dying cruiser slowly turned toward the observation windows as the black emptiness ahead of them began to tear apart. The darkness itself was opening. Captain Kalen had witnessed stars collapse into black holes, watched neutron storms tear fleets apart, and survived wars that reshaped entire sectors of the galaxy. None of those memories prepared him for what unfolded beyond the observation glass. The darkness split open without the graceful shimmer used by the great powers of the galaxy. Instead, reality itself looked as though it had been forced apart by brute strength. Massive fractures of blue-white light stretched across the void. And from those wounds emerged silhouettes so enormous that every surviving soul aboard the crippled cruiser instinctively stopped breathing. One vessel appeared, then another, then 20, then hundreds. The stars vanished behind walls of armored steel. The newcomers were unlike any warships Kalen had ever studied. Galactic navies built sleek cruisers with elegant curves and polished hulls that reflected nearby suns. These ships had no interest in beauty. They were blocky mountains of black alloy covered in thick armor plates, industrial cranes, exposed heat radiators, repair scaffolds, and countless weapon emplacements that looked as though they had been welded onto the hull by workers who cared more about survival than appearance. Their engines burned with a fierce blue glow that painted the broken battlefield in ghostly light. The sensor officer swallowed hard. I cannot count them. Kalen stared at the tactical display. Identify them. The computer hesitated before displaying a translation. None vessel's possible origin. Sol system human. Every bridge officer exchanged terrified glances. The stories spread across the galaxy described humans as monsters born on a planet where gravity crushed bones, storms swallowed cities, oceans contained predators larger than warships, and diseases evolved faster than medical science. Entire academies taught cadets to avoid provoking Earth's military because no civilization understood how Deathworlders survived conditions that would exterminate nearly every known species. No one expected them to arrive, certainly not with an armada. The fleet halted nearly 3,000 kilometers away. No weapons locked, no targeting systems activated. No threatening broadcast followed. Instead, a single transmission reached the dying cruiser. The voice spoke calmly through imperfect translation software. This is Admiral Marcus Hale of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We have received your distress call. The bridge remained silent. Marcus continued. We understand your vessel has suffered catastrophic damage. Medical teams are standing by. Rescue operations will begin immediately. No demands, no negotiations, no conditions. Captain Kalen felt his throat tighten. Lyra whispered, almost unable to believe what she had heard. They came. Before Kalen could answer, alarms echoed through the damaged cruiser. Multiple objects approaching. The tactical display filled with dozens of small contacts leaving the human flagship. Several officers recoiled. Attack craft! Kalen shook his head slowly. No, the objects carried no weapon signatures. Instead, scans identified them as armored rescue shuttles. Within minutes, the first shuttle carefully matched velocity with the crippled cruiser. Heavy magnetic clamps locked against the shattered hull with a deep metallic thud that echoed through every corridor. For the first time in months, someone had arrived. Engineering crews hurried toward the docking section despite exhaustion threatening to collapse them. Every surviving Marine raised weapons more out of fear than hope. They had no strength left for a fight, but instinct refused to surrender completely. The emergency airlock cycled. Steam hissed across the floor. The inner door slowly opened. Nobody moved. Out of the white vapor stepped a figure unlike anything the alien crew expected. He was enormous, nearly 2.5 meters tall inside heavy rescue armor, broad shoulders carrying enough equipment to repair half the ship. Thick magnetic boots struck the deck with heavy metallic echoes. Instead of carrying an assault rifle in both hands, he carried a medical supply case. Behind him came another human, then another. Doctors, engineers, firefighters, only a handful of soldiers. The lead human removed his helmet. Dark hair damp with sweat clung to his forehead. Deep lines around tired eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights. His expression carried neither fear nor arrogance. I'm Commander Nathan Briggs, he said through the translator. We're here to bring everyone home. Nobody answered. No one knew how. Lieutenant Lyra slowly lowered her weapon first. You're not boarding us? Nathan frowned. We are boarding you. No, she struggled to find the right words. I mean, taking our ship. Nathan looked around the freezing corridor. Broken pipes leaked coolant across twisted metal. Emergency lights, barely illuminated frightened civilians huddled beneath blankets. His voice remained gentle. You've already lost enough. Without waiting for permission, human engineers immediately spread through the damaged corridors. Portable generators roared to life. Emergency floodlights illuminated sections that had remained dark for weeks. Medical drones rolled into overcrowded shelters. Atmospheric processors began pumping fresh oxygen into dying compartments. The change happened so quickly that many civilians believed they were hallucinating. Dr. Elena Vargas entered the medical bay carrying 3 exhausted nurses behind her. The smell hit them instantly. Blood, burned flesh, disinfectants that could no longer hide infection. Beds filled every available space. Patients lay across the floor because no room remained. Alien doctors stood frozen, embarrassed by conditions they could no longer control. Their chief physician stepped forward. "We have no antibiotics." Elena nodded. "We brought enough for everyone. We lack surgical equipment. So do we." The alien blinked. Elena smiled faintly. "We brought extra." Hours disappeared into relentless work. Human medics refused breaks. They stitched wounds, restarted failing hearts, repaired broken breathing systems, fed starving children before feeding themselves. Engineer Samuel Ortiz climbed inside the dead reactor chamber with 3 volunteers. The radiation warning light still flashed. Kalen grabbed his arm. "You'll die in there." Samuel shrugged. "Not today. You don't know that." The engineer smiled while tightening his helmet. "I know someone's got to fix your power." For 16 straight hours, human workers crawled through spaces too narrow for their armored bodies. Their gloves tore against twisted metal. Sweat soaked through uniforms despite freezing temperatures. More than one collapsed from exhaustion only to stand back up after drinking cold coffee and continue working. Nobody complained. Nobody counted the hours. Captain Kalen walked through his own ship, unable to recognize it. Lights burned brightly again. Heating systems functioned. Children laughed for the first time in months after receiving warm meals from human field kitchens assembled directly inside cargo bays. Little Neris sat beside Nurse Amelia Brooks, holding a bowl of steaming soup with both tiny hands. "What is this?" she asked. Amelia smiled. "Chicken soup. There are no chickens. They're on Earth." Neris tasted it carefully. Her eyes widened. "It tastes warm." Amelia laughed softly. "That's usually the idea." The child looked up. "Why did you come?" Amelia hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because somebody should have." Later that evening, Caitlin finally met Admiral Marcus Hale aboard the human flagship Resolute. The command center surprised him more than the fleet itself. No polished crystal, no luxurious decorations. Every surface carried scratches from years of service. Coffee mugs rested beside tactical consoles. Crew members worked quietly, speaking with disciplined confidence rather than theatrical urgency. Marcus stood studying a holographic map. He looked older than Kalen expected. Gray streaks touched his hair. A long scar crossed one side of his jaw. His uniform showed signs of repeated repairs. The Admiral extended a hand. "I'm glad you made it." Kalen stared. "You crossed half the galaxy." Marcus nodded. "We did, for strangers." Marcus looked toward the holographic image of the destroyed human outpost. "They weren't strangers." Kalen followed his gaze. "Your people died there." "They did. You seek revenge?" Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. "No." Kalen frowned. "Then why risk your fleet?" Marcus folded his hands behind his back. "Because if we let fear decide who deserves saving, then the people who destroyed our outpost have already won." The alien captain had no response. His civilization had forgotten words like that centuries ago. 24 hours later, rescue operations neared completion. Nearly every civilian had been transferred aboard human hospital carriers for treatment. Engineers declared Kalen's cruiser stable enough for towing. Laughter echoed through compartments that had once sounded like tombs. For the first time in months, hope existed. Then every tactical console aboard the Resolute erupted with alarms. Bridge officers instantly turned toward incoming sensor reports. Commander Sophia Chen's face lost all color. "Slipspace ruptures detected." Marcus looked up sharply. "How many?" "Dozens," another officer interrupted. "No." His voice trembled. "Hundreds." The stars ahead twisted violently. Massive crimson fissures ripped across empty space. One after another, enormous Dominion warships emerged from hyperspace. Dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, carrier groups, an invasion fleet. Their commander transmitted immediately. The cold alien voice echoed across every bridge. "Human fleet, withdraw immediately." Marcus never looked away from the tactical display. More enemy ships continued arriving. Thousands of weapon ports rotated toward the helpless refugee convoy. Captain Kalen's breathing grew shallow. "They found us," Sophia whispered. "They're deploying attack formations." The bridge lights shifted to crimson. Throughout the entire human fleet, warning klaxons screamed across steel corridors. Crew members sprinted toward battle stations. Medical teams secured patients. Engineers sealed blast doors. Marines locked armored helmets into place. No one panicked. They simply moved with the practiced precision of people who had rehearsed this moment countless times. Outside, hundreds of human warships accelerated together, not toward the enemy, toward the damaged refugee convoy. One by one, the massive industrial battleships placed themselves between the Dominion fleet and every civilian transport, layer after layer, hull against hull, steel protecting flesh. The rescue ships disappeared completely behind an unbreakable wall of Earth-made armor. Captain Kalen watched the impossible formation through the observation glass. His people had expected the humans to flee. Instead, the Death Worlders had become a shield, and beyond that wall of black steel, the Dominion's weapon batteries slowly began to glow. The first thing everyone noticed was the silence. Hundreds of Dominion warships floated in attack formation, their weapon arrays glowing with enough destructive power to erase entire fleets. Across from them stood the human armada, every battleship positioned shoulder to shoulder like a wall forged from steel and stubbornness. Between those two forces drifted the refugee convoy carrying thousands of exhausted civilians who had already accepted death once. They were not prepared to watch another civilization die for them. The tactical display aboard the human flagship Resolute showed impossible odds. Enemy dreadnoughts, missile carriers, heavy cruisers, orbital siege platforms. The Dominion had brought enough firepower to crush an empire. Commander Sophia Chen looked toward Admiral Marcus Hale. They outnumber us nearly 4-1. Marcus never looked away from the stars beyond the bridge windows. I know. Our simulations, I've seen them. We don't survive this, Marcus answered with the same calm voice he had used before leaving Earth. That wasn't the mission. Around the bridge, officers exchanged brief glances before returning to their consoles. No one argued. Every person aboard knew exactly why they had crossed half the galaxy. The mission had never been to defeat an empire. It had been to bring strangers home. A transmission request flashed across the command display. The Dominion commander. Marcus accepted. The towering alien appeared above the bridge as a crimson hologram clad in ceremonial armor. His yellow eyes showed no anger, only cold certainty born from centuries of military superiority. I am High Marshal Vorak, Marcus nodded once. Admiral Marcus Hale. You shelter enemies of the Dominion. I shelter civilians. They witnessed matters beyond their authority. They witnessed murder. Vorak ignored the statement. Surrender the refugee vessels. Withdraw your fleet. Earth will not be harmed. No one aboard the bridge spoke. Marcus stepped closer to the hologram. They're under our protection. Vorak's expression hardened. You would risk your species for aliens you met yesterday? Marcus looked toward the medical carriers hidden behind Earth's defensive wall. Through internal cameras, he could see human nurses helping frightened children eat warm meals. Engineers still repaired damaged life support systems. Marines carried elderly refugees because they were too weak to walk. He turned back toward the hologram. They stopped being strangers the moment we answered their call. The Dominion commander leaned forward. You cannot win, Marcus nodded. Probably not. Silence spread across both fleets. Vorak seemed almost confused. You admit defeat. Marcus shook his head slowly. No. He folded his hands behind his back. I admit we're willing to die. The words echoed across every Dominion bridge. No threats, no speeches, no boasts, only absolute certainty. Back aboard the refugee cruiser, Captain Kalen watched the exchange in disbelief. Lyra stood beside him, barely breathing. They're sacrificing themselves, Kalen whispered. No, they have no chance. He looked through the observation window toward the black wall of human battleships. They've already decided that doesn't matter. Across the human fleet, final preparations continued with remarkable discipline. Letters recorded for families on Earth were automatically uploaded. Medical crews transferred critical patients deeper inside armored carriers. Damage control teams positioned emergency bulkheads. Engineers increased reactor output beyond recommended safety limits. Nobody shouted. Nobody panicked. Petty Officer Ethan Brooks tightened the photograph taped beside his weapons console. It showed his wife and 2 daughters standing beneath an old oak tree outside their home. His friend, Sergeant Noah Ramirez, noticed it. You thinking about them every second. You scared? Ethan smiled faintly, terrified. Noah nodded. Me too. Neither man tried hiding it. Courage aboard human ships had never meant the absence of fear. It meant refusing to let fear choose your actions. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion flagship, High Marshal Vorak watched live intelligence reports pouring onto his tactical display. Human ships had entered full defensive formation. No offensive attack wings, no flanking maneuvers, no attempts to seize initiative. Every vessel simply protected the refugee convoy. His intelligence officer frowned. Marshal, what? Their missile bays remain closed. So? They aren't preparing to attack. Vorak narrowed his eyes. What are they doing? The officer hesitated. They're waiting. For what? For us. The realization unsettled even veteran Dominion commanders. Every military doctrine in the galaxy relied on one assumption. Eventually, someone chose self-preservation. Empires threatened. Governments negotiated, commanders surrendered, civilizations calculated acceptable losses. The humans were doing none of those things. They had built an entire fleet around a single idea. If the Dominion wanted the refugees, they would have to shoot through Earth first. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. No missiles. No lasers. Only silence. The tension became unbearable. Even Dominion crews began questioning orders. One junior officer finally spoke. "If we fire?" Vorak remained silent. The officer continued carefully. "Every civilian network in explored space is watching." Another commander added quietly. They transmitted the entire confrontation. Thousands of independent observation satellites had already begun broadcasting the standoff live across the galaxy. Billions watched. Governments that once ignored Kalen's distress signal now stared at their screens in shame. Citizens gathered in city squares. Military academies suspended classes. Hospitals paused operations as doctors crowded around monitors. The entire galaxy witnessed one impossible image: the feared Death Worlders, standing between helpless strangers and certain death. Back on Earth, families filled parks, train stations, schools, and public halls where enormous displays carried the live transmission. Nobody cheered. Children held their parents' hands. Veterans stood silently in old uniforms. An elderly woman quietly whispered toward the screen, "Come home." Minutes stretched endlessly. Then another report reached the Dominion flagship. Long-range sensors had detected something unexpected. Civilian broadcasts across neutral space overwhelmingly condemned the Dominion. Trade alliances announced emergency sanctions. Several governments quietly mobilized their own fleets. The political cost of opening fire had become catastrophic. Vorak clenched his fists. He had arrived expecting frightened prey. Instead, humanity had turned compassion into a strategic weapon. His communications officer spoke carefully. "Marshal, your orders?" Vorak stared at Marcus Hale's unmoving fleet. Finally, he exhaled. "Withdraw." Shock spread across the Dominion bridge. "Sir?" I said withdraw. One by one, crimson slipspace corridors reopened. The Dominion fleet slowly turned away. Hundreds of warships disappeared into hyperspace without firing a single shot. The stars became quiet again. Nobody aboard the human fleet celebrated immediately. Bridge crews simply waited. Sensor officers verified retreat vectors. Recon drones confirmed no hidden ambush remained. Only after the final enemy signature vanished did Commander Sophia Chen slowly remove her headset. "They're gone." Marcus closed his eyes, just for a moment. Then he spoke softly, "Resume rescue operations." Cheers never erupted. Instead, the bridge applauded, not loudly, just enough to remind one another they were still alive. Captain Kalen sank into his command chair. His hands shook uncontrollably. Lyra wiped tears from her face without embarrassment. They actually left. Kalen stared toward the distant human flagship. No, they were made to leave. Weeks later, the combined convoy finally entered the Arcturus home system. News of the refugees' survival had spread faster than the fleet itself. Every orbital station overflowed with waiting families. Civilian transports surrounded the arrival corridor. Millions stood beneath open skies, watching bright streaks descend through the atmosphere. When the first rescue shuttle landed, silence covered the capital city. The ramp lowered. Little Neris stepped onto solid ground, holding Nurse Amelia Brooks's hand. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she saw her grandmother waiting beyond the security barrier. The old woman screamed her name. Neris ran. The elderly alien collapsed to her knees as the child threw both arms around her. Around them, the entire landing field dissolved into tears. Parents found sons. Brothers embraced sisters. Children searched desperately through crowds until familiar voices answered. Even hardened human Marines quietly looked away to hide wet eyes. Amelia watched the reunion beside Captain Kalen. "You made it." Kalen nodded. "No." He looked toward the enormous human fleet resting peacefully above the planet. "You brought us." 3 days later, the Galactic Assembly called an emergency session. Representatives from every major civilization attended. The chamber expected military demands from Earth. Perhaps territorial claims, compensation, political influence instead. Admiral Marcus Hale stepped to the central podium carrying only a worn notebook. He looked across thousands of delegates. "We're not here to discuss victory." Absolute silence followed. Marcus continued. "The Dominion destroyed one of our outposts. A massive image of Helios Station appeared behind him. 137 people died. Another image appeared. Captain Kalen's starving crew. Children wrapped in blankets. Dark corridors. Empty food stores. They were abandoned because helping them was considered inconvenient. No delegue dared interrupt. Marcus spoke quietly. "If compassion only exists when it's safe," he paused, "then it isn't compassion." He closed the notebook. "Earth has no interest in ruling anyone. We don't ask for tribute. We don't ask for territory. But understand this." His eyes swept across the assembly. "If another distress signal echoes through the dark," his voice became almost gentle, "call us." Months passed. Trade routes reopened. Old alliances shifted. Military textbooks rewrote their chapters on humanity. The phrase Death Worlder no longer inspired only fear. It carried another meaning, the species that would cross the galaxy for people they had never met. Back on Earth, Helios Outpost was rebuilt. Near its entrance stood two monuments. The first listed the names of the 137 humans who had died. The second listed every refugee saved by the rescue fleet. Neither monument stood higher than the other. Visitors often found Admiral Marcus Hale there before sunrise. One morning, young cadet Olivia Mercer approached him. "Sir?" Marcus looked up. "Yes, I've been studying the rescue mission." He smiled faintly. "Long reading." She nodded. "I wanted to ask something." "Go ahead." "Were you ever certain everyone would survive?" Marcus looked toward the distant horizon, where Earth's first orbital elevators pierced the morning sky. "No. Then why did you go?" Marcus was reminded quiet for a long time before answering. "Because, somewhere out there." He pointed toward the stars, slowly fading beneath daylight. Someone was waiting to hear 4 simple words. The old admiral stood, his weathered eyes never left the sky. "Hold on." A gentle breeze carried the sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the memorial gardens. Marcus smiled. "We are coming."